The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.
The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar. Why has China's Belt and Road Initiative failed to take off in Nepal? Nepal signed up to China's Belt and Road Initiative in 2017. Yet 6 years on, neither has much to show for it. In June, Nepal's foreign minister clarified that not a single project in Nepal under the BRI has been executed, after China falsely claimed the Pokhara International Airport as the BRI's flagship project in Nepal. And following an 8-day visit to China by Nepal's Prime Minister in September, of the 12 MOUs between the two countries, none was signed under the framework of the BRI. To consider these and related questions, tune into our next live broadcast.
Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, your host for our Democracy Forum debate for the next 90 minutes, where we will examine a world-changing issue of enormous significance, but in the microcosm of how it has worked or not in one small Asian economy. The Himalayan nation of Nepal, wedged between China and India, shattered by civil war, is crying out for infrastructure and the type of systems that China's Belt and Road Initiative is meant to offer amid its plans to create an arc of influence in the Indo-Pacific with its stadia, bridges, roads and railways. But our debate, why has China's Belt and Road Initiative failed to take off in Nepal? As we are about to learn, the situation is not straightforward at all, but to unpack and illuminate, we have a superb Democracy Forum panel. Andrew Ross, Samir Sharma, Kamal Bhattarai, and Prashanti Poudyal. Democracy Forum Chair Barry Gardiner usually listens in and sums up our debates at the end, but he is either en route or at COP23 in Dubai and has recorded his thoughts for the end. And as always, before we begin, Lord Charles Bruce, the Democracy Forum President, will lay out for us the canvas and the backdrop of our debate. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon to the webinar, which will examine the scale, purpose, and definition of Chinese-originated foreign direct investment in Nepal since 2017. We are fortunate to be able to call on the perspectives of our distinguished panelists to expose the intention of China's development-led diplomacy and the consequent impact on Nepali politics. I'm grateful to the team at the Democracy Forum for identifying the anomalous position which Nepal appears to have adopted, clearly as a target country for the Belt and Road Initiative, and arranging this event to uncover the truth of its relationship with China. My thanks, as always, to Humphrey Hawksley for taking the chair. On September the 30th, the Prime Minister of Nepal completed an official visit to China and signed 12 memoranda of understandings but at a press conference on his return, studiously avoided confirming if any of the agreements were entered under the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. As the diplomat concludes, I quote, Nepal signed on to China's ambitious infrastructure project in 2017, but 6 years later, the two countries have almost nothing to show for it. The history of Nepal's participation in the BRI started in 2013 with the Conference on Diplomatic Work with Neighboring Countries convened by Xi Jinping and the subsequent Central Conference on Work related to Foreign Affairs in 2014. 2 years later, Nepal and China entered the Transit Transport Agreement, the TTA, and subsequently the Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli signed 10 agreements in Beijing with the aim of reducing dependence on India for transit and other issues and to diversify access to seaports and alternative third-party country routes. In 2017, Nepal signed up to the BRI, initially selecting 35 projects, later whittled down to 9. The former Nepali Prime Minister, Babiram Bhattarai, in a moment of wishful thinking, explained the genesis of the agreements, but also revealed the conundrum that his country faces. I quote, Nepal, with its strategic location in between two big markets of 1/3 of the global population, could play a dynamic role as an economic corridor or vibrant economic bridgehead, and it could be cost-effective to both India and China. Nepal has long endured a complex diplomatic relationship with India and China. The former, once characterized by previous Nepal finance minister Madhukar S.J. Rana as, I quote, spasms of destabilization and patronage. Nepali politicians have long found themselves cast in an invidious role when pursuing foreign policy objectives that may risk causing offense to either China or India. The former Indian Foreign Minister, Vijay Gokal, explains the background to China's interest in cultivating Nepali politicians as a tributary class. I quote, so far as Nepal is concerned, while the security of Tibet and the southwestern frontier remains as critical security concerns, China also intends to pursue new geopolitical and geoeconomic objectives there, he adds. China might no longer be content with its historically passive posture in the Himalayan states, and its overall objective might be to establish strategic control. Additional complexity was added to this diplomatic triangulation when Nepal ratified the Millennium Challenge Corporation Nepal Compact, the MCC, last year, whereby the United States offered a grant of $500 million for infrastructure projects, unlocking a reciprocal commitment from the Nepal government for $130 million. News of the MCC grant broke in 2018 when the United States Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, claimed controversially that Nepal was part of the Indo-Pacific strategy, envisaging a geopolitical competition between free and repressive visions of world order. In May 2019, David Rance, the US Assistant Secretary for South Asia, confirmed, indeed, that the MCC was a crucial part of the Indo-Pacific strategy. The Nepali political analyst, Amish Raj Murmi, explains the predicament that Nepal finds itself betwixt the United States, China, and India. I quote, there is an old adage of Nepal being a yam between two boulders, he writes. Now we know it's 3 boulders. Nepal's fear of undermining a constitutional requirement to pursue a policy of non-alignment appears to have left the ratification of its participation in the BRI in limbo. NP Saud, the Nepali foreign minister speaking in the House of Representatives in June 2023, said emphatically, I quote, the project implementation plan of BRI is at a stage of discussion between Nepal and China. Not a single project in Nepal under the BRI has been executed. And interviewed for the Kathmandu Post in September, a former Nepal Chief of National Intelligence, Ganesh Adhikare, said, I quote, Nepal is clearly having a tough time balancing its political interests. The country is in a geopolitical quagmire as it struggles to maintain a non-aligned foreign policy. And writing for the Observer Research Foundation in August, Amish Raj Murmi explains that, I quote, Nepal views the BRI as not an umbrella initiative like Beijing does, but project specific. He concludes, while China's engagement in Nepali infrastructure is layered and across the board, Kathmandu does not want to be part of something it didn't sign up for. Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any questions or comments for the panel, please pass them through the chair.
Lord Charles Bruce, thank you very much. Nothing has happened at all. Geopolitics, project specific, when Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Malaysia, the Philippines, Italy even has embraced the Belt and Road project. What has happened in Nepal? Our first speaker is Andrew Ross, Senior Lecturer in International Business and Strategy at the University of Dundee. He is going to examine the Belt and Road Initiative as a means of economic development, both in the country and in the region. What is the role that China's initiative plays in the broader geopolitical power game? Andrew Ross, tell us what you know.
Humphrey, thank you for the introduction. Lord Bruce, thank you very much for the invitation. And I must say, it's a great pleasure to be here today to speak on such an interesting but also an important topic. Thank you. Before I speak specifically about Nepal, I'd like to attempt to set the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, in some context in relation to economic development and geopolitics, which I hope can inform the rest of our discussions today. So a reconstruction of the ancient Silk Road, the 21st century Belt and Road Initiative seeks to strengthen Beijing's economic leadership and meet its own needs for economic development. For participant countries, Beijing sees the BRI as inclusive and leading to a win-win situation, which can foster gains in economic growth, productivity, transportation infrastructure, and also softer aspects around cultural exchanges. From an economic development perspective, putting this in some context, although China's economy is set to be the largest beneficiary of the BRI, gaining some 1.7 trillion in GDP by 2040, Beijing's grand plan to connect East with West is forecast to increase global GDP by around 4.2% over the same period. Now, achieved through 6 economic corridors, the Overland Belt and the Maritime Road will connect China with Southeast Asia, Africa, and ultimately Europe, increasing opportunities for trade, investment, and jobs on a transcontinental level. Indeed, it's been estimated that transportation projects can reduce travel times by 12%, and international trade may be enhanced between 4 and 12%. So from a policy perspective, it's not difficult to understand why countries may want to be involved in the BRI, as the nature of the BRI provides a unique opportunity to develop both physical and institutional infrastructure in host countries. However, while the BRI is understandably viewed with optimism in some quarters, given its potential to deliver investments, jobs, transformational infrastructure projects, and general economic development, it is viewed with considerable and perhaps increasing anxiety by others in relation to non-performing assets and the implications of some countries not being able to meet their debt obligations. Indeed, it can be argued that some recipient countries are starting to feel the negative effects of Chinese BRI financing gone wrong, where less stringent and transparent investment conditions, such as those imposed by the International Monetary Fund, and the lure of initially abundant capital, particularly in the areas of capital infrastructure, is not delivering the economic returns predicted. This has led some to accuse the Chinese government of conducting debt book diplomacy, with debt defaults being used to acquire strategic assets or political influence over debtor nations in return for debt relief. From this perspective, there are arguments to suggest that the BRI is less to do with development and a lot to do with geopolitics, allowing China to extend its spheres of influence. Now, while there are many people who contradict this, and there's a lot of work, perhaps most well known would be that of Brottigam, who challenges the notion of Chinese debt trap diplomacy, concerns have certainly been raised about the motives and the impacts of the BRI in less developed countries. Of course, the most well-documented example of the Chinese debt book diplomacy would be the construction of Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, which on completion failed to generate the economic gains expected, leaving the Sri Lankan government unable to pay its debts. This led, for, I guess, want of a better word, to the acquisition of Hambantota port in Sri Lanka on a 99-year lease to China as the quid pro quo for the Sri Lankan government's inability to service its debt. Of course, one may argue when debt cannot be repaid, a debtor is beholden to its creditor, and that is no different in relation to BRI projects. However, the issue in question here is that in reality, the creditor is ultimately the Chinese state, whereby the BRI potentially acts as a Trojan horse with which China can extend its sphere of influence, and in some cases impact the national sovereignty of recipient countries. In the case of Nepal, issues associated with debt relief are clearly an issue, and it's well documented that Nepal has sought grant assistance and new terms of borrowing from China that are more in line with rates of debt relief issued by, for example, the International Monetary Fund. Therefore, while there are opportunities associated with previously cited BRI projects in Nepal, albeit most of which are yet to come to fruition, as Lord Bruce alluded to, or projects that are underway via Chinese investment but are not mutually agreeable between Nepal and China as to whether they are indeed bona fide BRI investments, a good example being Pokhara International Airport. It is also true to say that the almost ever-present political instability in Nepal, alongside a lack of institutional capacity and technical expertise to absorb such large infrastructure investments, has hindered progress. Another major factor at play, which may explain Nepal's hesitancy in relation to the BRI, is of course India. While not economically well off and underdeveloped by international indexes, Nepal forms a natural buffer between two rival economic superpowers and is therefore geostrategically important, and as such needs to perform a balancing act, keeping both of its powerful neighbours happy, which it can be argued has slowed the implementation of BRI activities in Nepal. Reflecting the complexity of this three-way relationship, while the majority of recent FDI in Nepal has its origins in China, most of Nepal's trade is with India. Thus, Nepal's long-term future and prosperity is in large part dependent upon Chinese investment, yet its short-term economic stability is dependent upon its trade with India. Consequently, like all countries, Nepal has to ask the important question: how do you maximize the opportunities presented by economic integration vis-a-vis the BRI, alongside ensuring your economic security? In the case of Nepal, it has to walk something of a tightrope and cannot afford to tilt too far in one direction. And I think this goes to some way to explaining the difficulties it has had in being able to recognize the potential benefits that the BRI has on offer in terms of infrastructure development. I'm conscious of time at this point, but I think Lord Bruce did allude to it, but it's also worth briefly mentioning the role of the United States, which has sought to counter Chinese influence in Nepal via its Millennium Challenge Corporation Nepal Compact. Lord Bruce alluded to the 500 million and the subsequent 197 million that has been put up by the Nepalese government to fund the compact. And that is there to meet Nepal's most acute needs, including reliable and affordable energy for homes, schools and businesses, and improved road maintenance for safer travel and transportation. So while the BRI has attracted much criticism in relation to its so-called lack of transparency around its funding mechanisms, particularly in relation to debt financing, the US MCC has tried to counter BRI weaknesses by providing a scheme that it says is more transparent via its offer of grants that pair investment in infrastructure with policy and institutional reforms, fighting corruption and respecting democratic rights. Naturally, China disputes the aims and the role of the MCC and considers it to be a threat. So ultimately, I think some countries are starting to come to the realization that China is not a conventional investor, but rather many of its investments take on an inherent geostrategic dimension. BRI projects undeniably enable China to extend its economic and geographic spheres of influence, irrespective of the questionable economic viability of some projects. So in conclusion, the BRI promised much in terms of economic outcomes for participant countries, yet to date, in reality, many of these positive externalities have failed to materialize, or are at least difficult to directly measure. For a conventional economic project and for conventional investors, this would likely signify failure. But the BRI is not a conventional economic project, but rather it is inherently geopolitical in nature. Moreover, as China increasingly utilizes and exercises its soft power to embed its ideological perspectives and global reach, the BRI more generally brings into sharp focus the global geopolitical implications and outcomes of countries pursuing the Beijing as opposed to the Washington consensus, a delicate tightrope indeed that Nepal needs to walk while simultaneously satisfying India. So at this point, I shall draw to a close, and I hope this has added a little context for you. And I now happily hand back to Humphrey and my fellow panelists, who I'm sure will be able to offer you more in-depth knowledge on the internal specifics of the BRI in Nepal. Thank you.
Andrew Ross, thank you very much. Could I just ground our debate a little bit? You talked about the geostrategic investment and the levels of transparency in the BRI. What is the difference between that and the Western investment or investment from the West that you get now, and particularly that came to the developing world or the global South, as we call it, in the 1970s and 1980s, when we heard there a lot about the debt relief, about how they were paying back so much money so these countries couldn't develop? Could you sum up, give us the nub of the difference there of what China is doing and what the West was doing in the 70s and 80s?
Yes, undoubtedly, Western governments, you speak about the 1970s, used debt financing to finance projects as well. I think to be quite short in relation to answer your question, I think what is different here is the scale of the money that is on offer. We're talking about over the last 10 years, $1 trillion having been pumped into the BRI projects. Obviously, much of the Western finance that you speak about in the 1970s also came from the multinational lending institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, etc. Here it's coming, broadly speaking, from one source, and that is China. And as I say, I would always link this back to the scale of it. And that you can... personally, my view is that the BRI does offer a lot in terms of potential around infrastructure development, etc., but it is absolutely undeniable that this allows China to expand both its economic and geographic spheres of influence. So I think to answer your question, Humphrey, it is the scale of what we have
the
here.
scale, and also that it's under this one umbrella. So we all talk about BRI because it's got a bumper sticker attached to it that we know. And before I let you go, Andrew Ross, Fun Sakya asked this question. You have answered it, but I'm going to give you the question again. Can Nepal's struggling economy sustain the BRI, especially in light of its high trade deficit with China and frequent reports of South Asian neighbors such as Sri Lanka falling into debt traps under the scheme?
Well, that is a very good question and a complex one indeed. And I think Lord Bruce alluded to the fact that, Nepal tries to remain non-aligned, but as I spoke about it, it's a buffer between these two economic superpowers, and it's a very difficult tightrope for it to walk. It would appear, on the basis of what I said and what Lord Bruce said, that Nepal is aware of that. And it, at this point, appears to have gone a little cold on the BRI, and I think that is on the basis of what it sees in terms of what is happening in other countries around potential debt trap diplomacy. And you can see by its signing of and ratification of the MCC, which is obviously a US-led project, and it's grant-based, that it is possibly trying to balance out all of trying to get a degree of triangulation between this very complex relationship.
Okay, thank you for that. Of course, the US, Japan, India, to extent in these new projects that we're seeing playing catch up a little bit against the bumper sticker that was announced so long ago in 2017. But to take us into more detail, Samir Sharma is up next, Department of Political Science at St. Joseph's College in Darjeeling, and a specialist in India-China relations, particularly in this Himalayan foothills region where all this is taking place. He is going to explain the relationship between Nepal and China and its implications for South Asian geopolitics. Samir Sharma, give us your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Humphrey, for having me. Thanks also to Dr. Andrew Ross for beautifully introducing the complexities of the issues. For me, BRI seems to be paradoxical in the sense that on the one hand, you have this great philosophical, ideological underpinning of China, where, China takes its rightful place in the globally significant pantheon of nations. But on the other hand, the implementation of the project itself seems to be very, very differentiated. It's often to the point of ambiguity. So it may seem like a paradox, but I think this is actually a kind of a strategic imbalance between unification, this ideological unification, and differentiation on the other hand. So that is how I would see the larger BRI projects. Coming to Nepal, a lot of Nepali scholars have already written about this, that Nepal has been facing the issues of underdevelopment, and I need not go into the detail. Specifically, there are issues of agricultural production, there is the predominance of the informal sector, mass migrations, this inability to utilize the diversity of Nepal. But I would like to focus here on the lack of reforms, which I think has played a significant part as far as the BRI is concerned. So number one, there is this inherent strategic kind of a paradox in the BRI. And second, it seems to me that even in the constitution of BRI, there has been a kind of a sweeping view, because we see that a lot of different kinds of entities, whether these are state-owned enterprises, these are NGOs, these are the private sector players, all seem to be, very much eager to play the BRI card, especially in Nepal. That is the second point. The third point I want to pick from Mr. Andrew Ross's point is that of the buffer state. This view of Nepal as the buffer state, and I think while that may have been a relevant point of view to examine Nepal in terms of geopolitics in South Asia, I think now with the BRI and the kind of assertion that we are seeing, from Nepali politicians. I think Nepal is now trying to effect a kind of a policy departure. So I would put the question of agency at the center of Nepalese foreign policy. That is the third point I want to make. The fourth point I want to make, which I think is a significant point, is the lack of reforms in Nepal, or if not the lack, at least the inadequacy of reforms in Nepal. For instance, a lot of numerous reform legislations were attempted in Nepal, and I have a list of them: Foreign Investment and Technology Transfer Act, the Private Partnership Act, Investment Act, the Special Economic Zones Act. All of these have not been able to generate the kind of growth that were expected out of them, and this has been uh, coupled with the kind of political instability that we have seen in Nepal, and this has more or less, stunted the kind of reforms that were expected. So that internally has had a very significant impact on the development of infrastructure in Nepal. The fifth point I want to make is that in terms of the larger, geopolitical perspective, uh, Nepal has not been able to take advantage of the economic growth of both India and China. That has been the reality for Nepal for the past many years. And now it seems to me that Nepal wants to sort of chart a kind of an independent foreign policy, but it gets pulled back into the larger triangle which Dr. Andrew Ross was also talking about, that between China, between India, and also now with the MCC you have the US. So my analysis and my understanding of Nepal, it focuses around these five crucial points. What I want to say is that even in the as far as the infrastructure projects themselves are concerned in Nepal, some of the infrastructure projects, especially those relating to the post-earthquake reconstruction, and these actually had begun much more before BRI was officially endorsed by Nepal. But despite preceding the official membership, China now considers reconstruction projects in Nepal as one of the core, aspects of the BRI. So this links to this, this sweeping view in the constitution of the BRI. And in my view, it seems to me that whatever has worked or could work will probably be clubbed in as part of the BRI. Whatever does not work, maybe it just fades into oblivion. Uh, the more critical question of whether BRI projects in Nepal are a debt trap or an economic pie, quote unquote, this was a phrase which was used. My answer to this question is that the funding modalities are very significant, and in some sectors, such as the telecom sector, Nepal has seen a lot of developments as far as the telecom sector is concerned. And I was in Nepal in the past few months, and it was wonderful to see internet connectivity on almost all of the major or even small shops on the roadsides. You just go in and they give you the Wi-Fi. So in terms of that, there is some visible transformations which are going on, but what is going to be the pattern of the change and where it might lead to, of course, is a part of a larger debate. Coming back to the funding modalities, especially even in the projects which are considered to be core of the BRI, for example, the transportation projects or the connectivity projects, the funding modality seems to be a big issue as far as Nepal-China BRI is concerned. And in terms of the Kerum-Kathmandu route, uh, there was this quote which I found, which I thought was very significant, and one local had reported to a newspaper, and he says that this railway project is a kagaj ko railway. It is a sapana ko railway, meaning that these are only in paper. These are dreams. It cannot happen. So there is a disjuncture between the kind of the grand narratives which are being played at the highest political levels between the Communist Party and the Nepali politicians, and then there is this very stark kind of a reality which is present at the ground level which is very illustrative of this paper railway and the railway of dreams. So that metaphor is very, very significant. At least I thought it was very significant to me. But one I think significant impact, or at least potential of the Nepal-China relations, in my view, would be in the religious tourism circuit. And I don't know how China is going to play this, but there is a lot of potential there. And there was a quote which said that religion and culture lubricate the wheels of commerce. So that was really significant for me. And coming back to the FDI projects, which arguably is also very significant. My study has found that apart from the cement industry, the rest of them have not managed to take off. And even in the cement industry, the FDI has run into a lot of troubles. For instance, there was a report on the Hoksen Narayani cement plant at Benigatorang rural municipality, where this project was found to be, involved in a lot of irregular deals in leasing of land. It also ran into trouble with Nepal's Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee, and of course there were trouble with the environmental impact assessment reports. So even Chinese, Nepali investors are also concerned that if you do not have any sort of restriction, or I wouldn't call it restriction, but some form of control, some form of supervision, then even they were fearing that they would be sort of bulldozed by Chinese FDI, even in cement industry. As I said, funding modality has been a very significant factor, whether they are loans or whether they are grants. What would be the rate of interest? What would be the repayment conditions? And because of that, a lot of projects in Nepal have to be BRI projects had to be shelved. One project which I have noted here is the West Seti hydroelectric project, also the Budi Gandaki hydropower project. So there are numerous examples of these kind of backtracking because of funding modalities. But the point is that irrespective of what happens to BRI in Nepal, I think the point that we should take forward is that Nepal itself is now attempting to reframe its traditional position, right, from the land of competition quote to the bridge of cooperation. So that is the the larger geopolitical perspective, which is now I think is in play. And Nepal, of course, would want to have agency in its dealings with both China and India, right? But it is a difficult position to be in, both in terms of the metaphorical implication as well as the physical location of Nepal. One thing which I thought was very, very significant in this particular debate was the open border with India. Now, this has been the subject of a lot of criticism, a lot of review, and there was the constitution of an EPG, which was supposed to review the entire 1950 open border issue treaty and submit it to the government. But there have been some issues, and it has now been shelved. So until and unless the open border remains, and the the mobility of people from India and Nepal is more or less unrestricted, right? Apart from trade, I think Nepal would still lean towards India. That is my feeling, because open border has its own characteristics, right? In terms of mobility, in terms of culture, in terms of sharing. So that is how I would see the larger, geopolitical perspective involving Nepal, India, and China.
Thank you very much, Samir Sharma. Could I throw to you a question from the audience, which we have discussed and answered, but give us your thoughts from Chanda Bahadur. Why have Beijing and Kathmandu been unable to reach a consensus regarding their differences over the BRI implementation plan? Just give us that in a nutshell.
I think we've discussed this. I think the major issues which have been flagged relate to the issues of funding. That is point number one. The second one is the Nepal's inadequate economic reforms, which have greatly hampered the kind of investment atmosphere which was expected to grow. And of course, there is the issue of political instability, which has ravaged Nepal for quite some time now. So I think these are the three main issues there.
So the funding modalities and the political instability are the key things. Raj Patel has come in.
Lack of reforms.
Yes. Sorry, yes, lack of has come in with Chinese interference in Nepal. Nepal might become another Sri Lanka, a financial disaster. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, the scale of BRI is such that it's very difficult to transplant examples from one state to another. I think we have to go more on a case-by-case basis, and from what we've seen till now, the reluctance or the difficulties of implementing BRI have shown that perhaps Nepal is thinking of something else.
Is Nepal being
more
cautious, more clever?
That would be my hunch. I think they are thinking in terms of their own requirements and their own needs.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Kamal Dev Bhattarai, an editor at the Annapurna Express and a detailed follower of Nepal's policy towards both India and China. We're going to learn, though, here about how the Belt and Road Initiative is viewed by the different Nepalese political parties, and then how that moves into the geopolitics that we've been discussing. Kamal Dev Bhattarai, unfold your argument for us.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. My previous speakers have said a lot the thing about the why BRI is not taking off in Nepal. I think to know the current status of BRI in Nepal, we have to understand how China treats the countries which have signed the BRI framework. And I see there are two ways, from the infrastructure point of view and from the point of view of BRI member countries. First, let me tell about from the infrastructure point of view. As a BRI member country, China, since the signing of the framework agreement, continues to push for big infrastructure projects in Nepal. But some projects are in initial stage and they are mainly related to rail and tunnel which have been put under the BRI framework. But there has not been negotiations, as previous speaker said, about the funding modality of such projects. China has put multi-dimensional connectivity under the BRI framework. And I think mainly after the endorsement of NCC, China is pressing Nepal to sign a big BRI project, saying that there should be level playing field for all big powers. China was keen to invest in Nepal's hydropower project, but now, due to the various reasons, there is complete monopoly of India in Nepal's hydropower projects. And second component I said is that how China treats its BRI member countries. It says it always tries to show progress made in the BRI member countries. In the countries, as a BRI member country, China puts all assistance and activities under the broader framework of the BRI. In this sense, China sees a lot of progress in Nepal. I mean that in the non-big infrastructure areas, China claims that it has made progress in Nepal. And other components that China is pushing in Nepal is that in the areas of policy coordination, we can see some engagement in this area, mainly between the planning commissions of the two countries. There has been several visits and there has been several meetings on regarding the policy coordination. Another area, trade and investment, China claims, and we see that there has been an increase in both trade and investment. Chinese investment has increased in the last 6 years, though there is a huge trade imbalance that Nepal is facing. Another factor, another component of BRI, according to Chinese version, is that financial integrations, and I can see some progress. because there has been some agreement regarding the digital payment and digital transactions between the Chinese banks and Nepali banks. And another component is related to people-to-people connections. And China is doing a lot in this area over the past 6 years, and it is trying to project it as a BRI, success of BRI. We can see that there has been both countries are entering in the new areas of the cooperations. For example, last year, 2 countries agreed to cooperate in the area of the parliament, that is Federal Parliament of Nepal and Rubber Stamp Chinese Parliament. And for the first time, I think Chinese are approaching to Nepal's court. Recently, Nepal's Supreme Court Chief Justice of Supreme Court visited China, and I see there is increased collaboration in the areas of universities, in the area of culture, and obviously there is increased party-to-party engagement. Now I come to my major point. When it comes to the understanding of the political parties, I see political parties either don't understand what is BRI or they are just pretending. I just want to quote that because I'm saying this because many political leaders still think that BRI is like grant assistance that other Western countries are providing. But when I see the white paper of the BRI released on its 10th anniversary, it clearly says that BRI is not one of the China's aid programs or a geopolitical tool, but collaborative efforts for a shared development. It means there is no component of the grant or aid in the BRI. It is about taking loan. It is about taking loan from the Chinese banks. And though there are not proper understanding among some politicians, I see that our top politicians, mainly who have become the prime ministers, are aware about the BRI project. The Nepali Congress, that is the grand oldest party, in terms of ideology, you can say it is a centrist party, has already made it clear that Nepal is not in a position of taking high interest loan. During the visit of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi last year, then Prime Minister Sherbahadur Deuba clearly conveyed the message that Nepal cannot implement mega projects under BRI because of its poor economic conditions and because of the high interest loan. Some communist parties try to say that Nepali Congress is blocking the BRI project and they want to take BRI project ahead. But when it comes to the loan, or as said by our previous speaker, funding modality, those communist leaders don't have any answers about this, this high interest loan. But what I see is that at least former prime ministers, either from Nepali Congress, that means a centrist party or oldest democratic party, or the communist parties. Mainly there are 2 parties, that is CPN Maoist, that is currently in the government, and another is CPN UML. If you see the statement of the former 2 prime ministers, KP Sharma Oli, who became prime minister from 2018 to 2020-21, and the statement made by Kamal, the Maoist leader, who is currently prime minister. In 2018, KP Sharma Oli and his team urged the Chinese government to build BRI project under the grant assistance. And they conveyed the message that Nepal cannot take loan to build the big infrastructure like Kerung-Kathmandu Railway. Again, the Kamal Dal, either he was outside the government or inside in the government, he is clearly urging Chinese leaders that please build a BRI project under the grant basis to showcase that BRI is moving ahead. And Pushpa Dal has time and again said that after the endorsement of the MCC, he wants to push some BRI project, but it is clear that he is not in favor of the taking loan. Not only the politicians, I mean the former prime ministers, even Nepal's bureaucracy and intellectuals, and if you meet the bureaucracy, representatives from the bureaucracy, they are very much aware that currently Nepal is not in a position of making big infrastructure project under the high interest loan, because the examples are here. The example of the Pokhara International Airport, though it is not under the BRI, now Nepal is struggling to pay back. It is not only the BRI, Pokhara. We can see that another international airport, Gautam Buddha International Airport, is facing the similar problem. It shows that Nepali leaders are very much aware that, and the examples of the Sri Lanka and Pakistan are already there. And I sense that Nepali leaders are aware of these developments, because, and at the same time, there is a debate that China's interest rate is approximately 2%, which is too much high than the loan that other international financial institutions provide us. If other international organizations, World Bank, ADB, IMF can provide loan in the low interest rate, why Nepal rushes to take high interest rate? This is the very flat. This is the very common issue, I think, and this is the key issue. This is the key issue that is why BRI is not taking up Nepal. Again, I think that if we see BRI from the point of view of the infrastructure project, and I think that the dominant factor is about the interest and the loan, and it is clear that Nepal doesn't have the capacity to pay back the loan. In this period, China has created some other problems related to BRI in Nepal. For example, China is saying that its global security initiatives and global civilizational initiatives are the part of the BRI, and it is asking Nepal to join those initiatives. But again, as previous speaker said, due to Nepal's non-alignment policy and its stated policy or the all-party consensus policy that Nepal cannot join any security bloc. That is why Nepal has made clear that it cannot join China's GSI and global civilizational initiatives. And the final factor, geopolitical factor, is already there. Previous speakers discussed a lot about the geopolitical factors, the Indian factors, and other. I can recall that in 2017, when Nepal was preparing to sign the BRI framework, there was message from other countries that Nepal should not join the framework. But as the previous speaker said, those countries the countries I have hinted are drawing the attention of Nepal about the transparency of the BRI, the issue of the corruptions, and the issues of the national sovereignty and other. But again, this is not the geopolitics is not a dominant factor. The dominant factor is Nepal is not in a position of borrowing high interest rate to build big infrastructure project. If it is feasible, Nepal can take loan from the China despite the geopolitical pressures. It doesn't mean that the Nepal cannot take BRI project due to the geopolitical pressure, because there are many instances that Nepal has withstand the geopolitical pressure. For example, there was pressure from China not to endorse the MCC project, but Nepal endorsed the MCC project. And I would like to conclude, and my very simple and simple point is that this is because of the loan. This is the issue of the financial. This is the issue of the feasibility, that Nepal is reluctant to go for the big infrastructure project. And you rightly said that Nepal is approaching a very cautious approach, and you can also say that if I borrow your words, Nepali politicians are very, very clever, and they are playing a very clever, they are playing, or they are dealing these issues in a very clever way when it comes to the BRI. This is my point. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Could I give you, you mentioned Pokhara Airport. Anil Batra says, and just give us a one-line comment on it, since the Pokhara International Airport has been blighted by quality and safety concerns and has barely attracted any international business, is it, rather than a flagship of BRI, a glaring example of Chinese malpractice? Is that how it's seen?
Yeah, in Nepal, it has not gone well. Nepal, time and again, even Nepal's foreign minister, South, has stated in the parliament that it is not a BRI project, because Nepal signed BRI in 2017, but we took loan in 2016.
Okay,
and
so it's not a BRI project, although it's obviously perceived to be part of the Chinese influence or investment into Nepal. Can I give you a question from Amit Rama? Has the $500 million grant to Nepal from the United States under the Millennium Challenge Corporation caused bad blood between China and Nepal?
Yeah, obviously there was the bad blood, and the I think this is the first time in Nepal's diplomatic history that the China clearly opposed US project in Nepal. Obviously, there was not such tendency in the past, but I think though China objected the MCC project, what I think is that China just did it to say that if American project is implemented, as I said in my earlier remarks, that China is seeking some level playing field because it believes that a BRI project is not moving ahead due to the pressure from the other big powers.
Okay,
I think this is not the objection of the BRI project. I think they are trying to ensure that there should be level playing field for China as well.
So this is an interesting point where the geopolitics between superpowers is being prioritized over the building of the independent projects that are needed, like the roads, the rails, and the airports. Thank you, Kamal, very much for that. Please wait. We're going to have many more questions coming. Our final panelist is Prashanti Poudyal, Research Fellow for the Center of Social Inclusion and Federalism in Nepal. Prashanti is in Kathmandu, I think, as is Kamal. She's going to tie elements of this debate together, such as we've just heard the opaque funding of the BRI and why Nepal traditionally trades more with faraway economies like Italy and France more than it does with China. Prashanti Poudyal, round off for us our discussion.
First of all, Mr. Humphrey, thank you very much for having me on board, and also to Lord Charles Bruce for extending this invite to me. This has been so insightful. And obviously, the speakers before me have already shed much light on BRI. Why has Nepal not benefited from BRI as much as it intended to earlier when it signed BRI? And the power scenario, geopolitical scenario. So I have very little that I can really share, but I want to speak about a few points that I have in mind, and that might be very important to truly understand why BRI initiative has not taken off in Nepal. The first that has already been raised by many of my fellow panelists is the funding modality. As we know, the BRI loans are much higher than loans provided by other multilateral organizations. For example, to give you a number, according to the aid data of the College of Williams and Mary, the average interest rate of the BRI projects is 4.2%, with a grace period of less than 2 years and maturity length of less than 10 years, while that of other multilateral agencies is around 1.3% with a more extended repayment period. So the funding is already the whole interest rate and the loan, the funding modality is already a lot expensive for Nepal when it comes to BRI. And Nepal has been quite firm only after 2021 and after the Sherbadur Deuba administration, when he clearly made his stance that Nepal was simply unable to proceed with commercial loans, and he asked for grants at best or concessional loans with interest rates at par with that of multilateral agencies at worst. Ever since that statement was made, implementations in regards to BRI was impeded because of that, because most of the BRI projects are in terms of loan component rather than grant. So that is the primary reasons. Another is, of course, experiences of regional neighbors acted as a cautionary tale for Nepal, in particular Sri Lanka and Pakistan. As we know, I should have made this clear, I should have talked about this earlier, that BRI is not simply just infrastructural projects or just connectivity projects. It's a lot more than that. It's number one, the connectivity aspect comes to play. Another one is financial integration. Another is policy coordination and policy coordination and exchanges. And finally, people-to-people ties. So these four components actually makes BRI. And in terms of financial integration, free trade agreement is one of the provisions that Nepal also signed in the BRI MOU that it signed in 2017. The free trade agreement is rather a complicated one. It's contentious in many ways. Especially what's interesting to note is that the MOU, or the document that was signed with BRI, was not revealed for a while. I think it was only after 4 years of signing BRI that a local newspaper or a media house leaked or just announced provided the MOU that was signed between Nepal and China. And only then all the provisions signed under the BRI between Nepal and China was made public and left for scrutiny. And a lot of concerns were raised under certain contentious provisions, such as the main one is the free trade agreement. Especially if Nepal is not trading, especially if Nepal has trade deficit with China, and Nepal is importing far more than it is exporting. Like Mr. Humphrey raised, we export more to distant economies like Japan and Italy than we do to China. We're exporting very less to China. How can a country like that even benefit from free trade agreement? Moreover, China is already providing 98%, I think, of its tariff lines on zero tariff basis to all the LDCs, which includes Nepal. So 2% extra is not something that Nepal can truly benefit from, truly make a difference from. Those contentious provisions are also present, and there's another provision called policy exchange. What does policy exchange truly entail? So there are already contentious provisions on place that was only left into scrutiny after the MOU was made public. I think in 2022, yeah, it was made public by an online media house. So those contentious provisions are already in place that Nepal needs to negotiate with. And the free trade agreement that China had with Pakistan is also a cautionary tale for Nepal, because Pakistan did not benefit a lot from it. There are numerous research papers written on it as to how Pakistan could barely use much of those free trade, the tariff lines, and very little. It benefited very little from it. And as we know, the infamous Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, that it could not reap benefits from, that it could not gain a lot of economic returns, and as a result became a crumbling crumbled the entire economy of the country. Such cautionary tales also provided was scared or provided fear for Nepal, and as a result, recently in the Sherbahadur Deobhai administration, it was Mr. Sherbahadur Deobhai, the then Prime Minister Sherbahadur Deobhai, made it clear to his Chinese counterparts that Nepal does not want to move forward with the loan component and would prefer more with the grants. That is one of the main reasons, I believe, for why the BRI has been in limbo. Secondly, I think we should also understand that Nepal itself was very less prepared when it comes to BRI. While I was researching for the BRI research that we were doing from my office, one of the former ministers said, "Why did we even sign the BRI? Because China proposed us to sign BRI. Did we really think of all of the projects that we had, and did it start from bottom to up?" No, it probably did not. So Nepal was not prepared for BRI. In fact, some experts or some stakeholders even claim that, was it a political agenda? Was it a way to diversify trade and to trade lesser with India and to increase Nepal's trade with its northern neighbor? Perhaps that was the reason for why we signed BRI in the first place. So we were not prepared for BRI. 35 projects, for example, first was proposed by the then Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, and it was upon being requested to reduce the number, it was reduced to 16, and after that, in order to reduce it to a single digit, 9 projects were subsequently proposed. And during Prime Minister Pushpa Kamal Dahal's recent visit to India, 2 of the projects from those 9 projects proposed were handed over to Indian companies. So that itself leaves us to question what really is the future of BRI. Has Nepal really stopped believing that BRI is actually going to happen? Is that why it shifted 2 of the 9 projects listed under BRI, originally under BRI, to India? My third point is regarding Nepal's domestic politics influencing the BRI implementation, which Kamal sir has abundantly talked about, spoken about, as to how China has sought to influence the Kathmandu administration via its ties with the communist parties of Nepal. And changes in the domestic political scenario of Nepal also affected the implementation of the BRI. So in 2017, political parties, particularly the communists, had adopted bullish rhetoric on the BRI projects, labeling them as economic and political game changer. But at the same time, the communist collaboration in 2017, so China was very upbeat about the communist collaboration in the 2017 general and federal election, and had even played the key role of a facilitator in the subsequent merger of 2 main communist parties to form the Nepal Communist Party. But as the narrative around BRI shifted for worse, political parties' enthusiasm for China's BRI decreased, which was further affected by the split of the Nepal Communist Party into 2 rival factions. So that in turn also affected the implementation of BRI. So I guess to sum up quickly, actually I have one last point that I want to quickly talk about. It's also the narrative around BRI. As of now, there's confusion as to what projects constitute BRI and what does not. Like, for example, the former former ambassador Ho Yankee infamously said that the Pokhara International Airport is part of the BRI, and which the foreign minister N.P. Saud had to clarify that no projects under the BRI has yet been implemented, and as a result, Pokhara International Airport is not part of BRI. So In the same speech, the former ambassador Ho Yang-ki also noted that Gautam Buddha International Airport is also part of BRI, which is not true. At least it's not one of the 9 projects listed under the BRI, originally under the BRI. So, and now there's this new concept of Silk Roadster platform, which has been announced under the BRI as part of its people-to-people exchange and a lot of soft and social initiatives. So now there's confusion as to which projects are BRI and which projects are not, and whether such clear distinction should be drawn or not is a different debate, I believe. But I would say my pain point is that the implementation of BRI agreement in Nepal is now primarily contingent on China's flexibility to address Nepal's concerns regarding the funding modality and other contentious provisions in the BRI MOU, such as the free trade agreement and the policy exchange that I spoke briefly about. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Fascinating, that 4.2 to 1.3% loan rate. Can I just give you a question from Peter Cornish, which you have answered, as many have, but your take on it. What do the panel think of China's response to the Taimur hydroelectricity project and the Pukot Kanali hydroelectric project proposed under the BRI framework being awarded to Indian instead of Chinese companies? In a nutshell.
Right. That was it was interesting because when Prime Minister Dahal went to India, made his first official visit to India.
What do you think about it? What does it mean on this geopolitical thing we're talking about? This sort of struggle between the US and China, India. Where does this sit in that?
Well, obviously, China is not happy about it. It's interesting because the next visit that Prime Minister Dahal made was to China after India, and it was. In the China definitely cannot be happy about it, and it definitely has impacted Nepal-China relationship in some ways, I believe.
Sorry, was it one of the 9 projects?
It was.
It was definitely one of the 9 projects. So, because the other ones we talked about, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to change our formula a little bit and go to a pre-recorded address by Barry Gardiner, who's an MP, senior veteran, member of Her Majesty's opposition, soon possibly to be in government, and he is the chair of Democracy Forum. Whilst we're listening to that, I want you to all think about a question from Prashanti Kumar, which wraps up what we've been discussing. He said, is Nepal likely to be pressed into supporting Beijing's initiatives, such as the Global Security Initiative, and how could this fit in with its policy of non-alignment? What I'm really looking at for an answer here, the catalyst that Prashanti Kumar has given us, is that how much is this geopolitical struggle stopping or helping the infrastructure that Nepal needs? And I'll be going around looking for short answers on that. But now over to Barry Gardiner, who has long experience in foreign affairs and South Asia.
Scratch history and you find geography. Or as the estate agents of the world would put it, location, location, location. It's what makes the great cities of the world great cities. They're built where geography dictates, because of the solid rock where a bridge can be built across a river, because of the depth of water that can allow great sea-going vessels to load and discharge, because a mountain pass affords the only viable trade route for goods to market. Charles began our discussion today by giving the perfect illustration of this principle. Nepal, he said, with its strategic location in between 2 big markets of 1/3 of the global population. What an opportunity. What a curse. How should it play the role of dynamic economic corridor between the 2 regional superpowers? How can it maintain its constitutional position of non-alignment When Beijing came a-wooing in 2017, it was difficult to resist. A jilted suitor can become a dangerous and resentful ex. And so Nepal signed up to the BRI, perhaps not so much out of love as expediency, and sought to ensure that the relationship remained platonic. Hence, the 35 original projects shrank to just 9, none of which have blossomed. Samir Sharma has argued that BRI in Nepal indicates an attempt to reframe Nepal's geostrategic position. And she too couches Nepal in the role of a lover, talking in an article she published last year about the pivotal role of polyamorous cooperation envisioned by Nepal, both in the context of Sino-India relations and in staking its agency towards an independent foreign policy. Ultimately, though, she argued that this attempt was constrained by the concrete unresolved issues of BRI investments in Nepal, as well as by the larger imbalances in power that exist. Prashanti Poudyal explains that one reason the BRI remains in limbo is the lack of clarity surrounding its funding modality. In the MOU signed in 2017, it's absent, and no agreement has yet been reached. The BRI has a loan component, and projects are carried out with loans, not grants. She's written, citing aid data, that Chinese loans for BRI projects typically have an interest rate of 4.2%, with a grace period of fewer than 2 years and a maturity of fewer than 10. In contrast, soft loans from multilateral donors such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank have a maximum interest rate of 1.3% and a longer repayment period. Nepal simply can't undertake large-scale infrastructure projects with such commercial loans without a guarantee of return on investment. This should have been made clear to China before signing the MOU, but it was only after the Nepali Congress formed a government in 2021, she says, that Nepal took a firm position. The experiences of Sri Lanka and Pakistan with the BRI projects served as a cautionary tale for Nepal, such that they came to see China's lending processes as debt trap diplomacy, with hidden debts and malpractices damaging recipient countries. As the BRI's global momentum slowed down and the narrative shifted for the worse, Nepal's political establishment started getting cautious and even reluctant regarding the BRI's implementation. And finally, during Prime Minister Dahal's visit to India in June 2023, 2 projects originally proposed under the BRI, namely the Temur hydroelectricity project and the Phulkot-Karnali hydroelectric project, were actually awarded to Indian companies. So is it any wonder that China has been trying to present a more positive image of the BRI, falsely claiming the Pokhara International Airport as the flagship project of the BRI? Well, unsurprisingly miffed by such a statement, the very day before the airport was formally opened, Nepal's Minister of Foreign Affairs, MP Saud, retorted that the project implementation plan of the BRI is at the stage of discussion between Nepal and China. Not a single project in Nepal under the BRI has been executed. And in what must be one of the most extraordinary responses ever to such a diplomatic put down, a senior Chinese official had simply this to say: obviously, it's a BRI project, and we are firm on it. But if Nepal says it's not under the BRI, that is okay for us too. Hey, what do you know? Now, Kamal Bhattarai comments that this begs the question, what does BRI mean for Nepal? Or more importantly, is there a proper understanding in Nepal on BRI? Even after 10 years, the government has not been able to take a concrete position on the program. He points out that the Chinese officials say there are 5 pillars of BRI: policy coordination, infrastructure, unimpeded trade, financial integration, and connecting people. And whilst much of its focus in Nepal has been on the infrastructure component, he believes the BRI is gradually shifting towards soft power. He insists that China is aware of the BRI's reputation on the international stage and is rebranding the program as the BRI 2.1, about which little is known. China, he says, wants to create a positive public opinion on BRI in Kathmandu, while Western countries have tried to sway Nepali leaders and policymakers by highlighting the debt issue of the BRI. Beijing is trying to override that narrative by portraying the program as a force of greater good, of development and prosperity. In the past, Andrew Ross has argued that as China exercises its soft power via BRI projects, it simultaneously extends its geographical sphere of influence and increasingly establishes the strategic foundations for the deployment of hard power. And this leads to a serious potential diplomatic problem for Nepal. The growing interest of the United States in the region may find Kathmandu struggling to keep equidistant, not just between India and China. In a recent article in South Asian Voices, Gaurab Thapa argued that China needs Nepal's continued support for its One China policy and will do everything it can to ensure that the 12,000 Tibetan refugees who reside in Kathmandu do not engage in anti-China activities. So far, Nepal has kept China happy on these points, but as a small and immediate neighbour, Thapa warns that Nepal should stick to this policy to avoid any sort of political and economic backlash from China. And he points out that Kathmandu's continued refusal to sign an extradition treaty with Beijing is a sign of the country's resilient stance of not compromising its independence. Equally, Nepal's parliament's ratification of the Millennium Challenge Corporation compact with the United States last year, but they declined to participate in their state partnership program for security. This indicates the government's geopolitical balancing act, guided by the principle of non-alignment. Thapa says it should clearly state to India, China, and the United States that it won't welcome any undue geopolitical maneuverings or pressure. India's traditional role of an important political and economic actor in Nepal won't change, but Nepal needs to find ways to enhance its relation with the United States and other developmental partners to diversify trade and investment options. If it does so, and uses its geostrategic positioning to reap economic benefits from all three countries, India, China, and the US, its relations with China may yet come to reflect in reality the banner that was hung in the streets of Kathmandu when President Xi visited 4 years ago. That banner simply said, "Chinese-Nepal friendship is as tall as Mount Komalangma."
Thank you, Barry, for that, which leads us back or on to the question that I want to raise from Prashanti Kumar, asking whether Nepal is likely to be pressed into supporting the Beijing initiative, such as the Global Security Initiative, and how that fits in with its policy of non-alignment. And really this question, and I'm going to go around the panel as the way we went, this question of how much is geopolitics helping or hindering the building and the development of Nepal? Andrew Ross, give us your thoughts on that.
Humphrey, thank you very much. Yes, it's a great question. So as we know, China has been pushing the GSI with Nepal. To date, Nepal has rejected this. Ultimately, as a number of our panelists have discussed today, Nepal knows it has to triangulate the US, China, and India. And these are, when you speak about Nepal, one of perhaps the least powerful countries economically in the world, it needs to triangulate the three most powerful economic countries in the world. And Nepal knows it can be squeezed at any point. They know that, they feel it. And in my opinion, its policy of non-alignment undoubtedly slows down any of the potential benefits that it may be able to derive from the BRI. And ultimately, I think its ability, its inability to be aligned with any of these three major powers ultimately slows down its overall economic development, which is unfortunate because we've discussed the pros and cons of the BRI today, but there's certainly opportunities to be had from it. But ultimately, as I've said before, it is inherently geopolitical.
So they're being too cautious.
Yes, that is a good question, but I think it comes back ultimately to this tightrope that they need to walk, and they're always in danger of upsetting at least one of the three most powerful countries in the world economically. And in the end, you could argue that they get nowhere as a result of this.
Yes, I mean, it is a type, but many countries are walking this tightrope between China and the US, or China and whatever power happens to be around. So, Samir, Sharma, supposing they Nepal turned around and said, yes, we'll take Japanese, Indian, and American infrastructure project grants or investment, and we'll minimize that of China. Would that work?
I mean, that would be the ideal position for China. I mean, for Nepal. That would that ideal for them.
Would that skew its non-alignment position?
No, that's why I said it would be ideal for them. But of course, the realities are very different now. And I would agree with Dr. Ross that there is a very, a kind of a lingering tightrope which has to be walked by Nepal. And but I see some positive development here. I mean, I was listening to Kamal Daju, and the kind of debates that are now happening within the internal domestic sphere of Nepal with regard to the possible advantages and disadvantages of the larger geopolitical actions. I think Nepal is cautiously optimistic, I would say, if not fully.
Thank you for that. Kamal Bhattarai, is it possible, running this theme on a bit, to separate the bridges and the roads and the rails that you need in your development from the geopolitics?
Yeah, thank you very much. Very interesting questions. And I think this is one of the difficult tasks that Nepal is facing. Now it has become very difficult for Nepal to distinguish development project from the strategic and geopolitical components. In the past, big countries used to provide assistance or used to provide loan for the for the pure development project. But now the development projects are coming with the strategic and security interest embedded on it. And Nepali rulers and Nepali governments are facing difficulties to avoid such factors. I think, as you said while asking the questions, that the growing geopolitical tensions is becoming very tough, or I would say it is becoming a course for Nepal in its path of the development. Nepal one.
Sorry, I just want to. Is that in China, a China loan carries a high interest rate attached to it, and the debt trap. What does the Western loan or grant come with? Does it come with?
Yeah, it is very transparent, and there is no need to bias to China that most of the Western countries or the big Asian countries are providing either grant or the very consensus loan. You see the assistance from the United States that I don't think that the United States provides any loan. It is obviously providing the assistance. Okay. And Japan is providing the grant, and if there are loans, and the interest rate is very low.
Thank you very much for that. Prashanti, do you agree with Samir, and I think with Kamal, that an ideal world would be that if the Japan, India, the US, and this grant system built all of Nepal's infrastructure projects?
That's a very you asked me a very controversial question, I would say. I think Nepal is very proud of being a sovereign state. Nepal is very proud of not being one of the country that was one of the colonies of British. It's one of the things that we keep talking about. So it would not want it would not be ideal, or it would not be appropriate for such a proud nation to have so many different countries build all of its infrastructure. It should learn to also build its own infrastructures.
So to become self-sufficient and sovereign,
Yes.
and not rely on either China or the West or India or anything like that.
Yeah, it shouldn't. I don't think that's how it should be.
Okay, that is a very good thought to end this fascinating discussion with. Thank you all, panel, for taking part in that. Andrew Ross, Samir Sharma, Kamal Dev Bhattarai, Prashanti Poudyal. Thank you, Barry Gardiner, who is either on his way or has just landed in Dubai for the COP23 Climate Summit, and Lord Charles Bruce for setting the scene, and for all the team at Democracy Forum. To get summaries of our Democracy Forum debates, our sister magazine, Asian Affairs, carries all those, plus a lot of other very interesting issues that drill down, stories that drill down into the issues that we're discussing. Our next Democracy Forum is on December the 13th at the same time. China and Central Asia, a new dependency, similar theme from Nepal, we go to Central Asia. What exactly is happening there? Please join us then. And until then, thank you all for such a stimulating, informative, and insightful discussion. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.